Hello, everyone, and good morning. Welcome in this MicroStrategy World session. My name is Laurent, and I am a principal sales engineer at MicroStrategy. In the next 30 minutes, we're going to talk and debate about the need and the importance of an enterprise semantic graph. And for this, I have the pleasure to receive virtually Mr. Kyung-Woo Chung, who is the head of sales engineering in APAC. So welcome, Kyung-Woo, and maybe you can introduce yourself to the audience and give a little bit of words about your role at MicroStrategy.
Thank you, Laurent, and hello, everyone. My name is Kyung-Woo Chung, Head of Sales Engineering for Asia Pacific in MicroStrategy. I'm very excited to talk about this topic, Enterprise Semantic Graph, because I've been in the analytics industry for about 15 years for now, and Enterprise Semantic Graph has been one of the passion for me, and I do believe that this is the core of any successful analytics deployment. So I hope you enjoy the session. I hope you get as excited as I am about the Enterprise Semantic Graph.
So I'm sure that you have implemented so many different projects, and if I hear the word semantic graph, it's something that is quite recent, but it looks like to me that it's the same thing as a semantic layer. So can you explain to the audience maybe what is the difference or what is the concept and why it is important when you want to create analytics projects to have this kind of layer to transform the data into dashboards, for example?
Yeah, basically what we have been doing in analytics industry is turning the data into information and then to intelligence into the analytics application. And to do that, semantic layer has been a great help because it gives us the data abstraction and business to abstraction, basically the translation from the IT language to the business language so that the people can understand. But recently, what we're trying to do is to empower more business users to do it themselves. We want more people to get the data from the database and create their own analytics applications themselves. And by doing that, we actually need additional components such as how do we secure the data? How do we make sure all the data is correct? And how do we track who's using which part of the data? So all of those data governance components are becoming much more important. So semantic graph is more of an extension to support all of these data governance aspects, and at the same time to support the self-service analytics for the business users. It's more of an extension of the semantic layer.
Okay, I get it. But then self-service tools, we have plenty on the market. So, and I feel that if I use one of them, I can connect to my data, I can actually create a semantic layer, and then I can create my analysis. So can you explain the difference between what we can see with MicroStrategy? You explained it was an extension. You explained about the security. How would it be different with MicroStrategy? What is the core difference?
Yeah, so as you just said, the typical way of building an analytics application is to connect to the data, get the data set, and then build a model on top of that and build analytics content on top of the model that you created. And that is a very quick and very easy approach, but there can be another approach. Basically, the endpoint, the data and the analytics content is pretty much the same, but we can actually flip it around and build the model first and then create the data set and then create the analysis content. So we can actually have the model first approach as well. So in this diagram, it does not look that much of a difference. But if you think about it, and the benefit of the right-hand side is that your model is just limited to the data set. So if you have like maybe 20 fields in the data set, that's pretty much it. You don't really need to do like modeling for the entire database. But on the left-hand side, you will basically have to deal with the entire database to begin your analysis. But when it comes to more scalable situation, when we think about hundreds and thousands of analytics content, maybe hundreds of data sets that we need to create. And on the left-hand side, we can actually keep the model as a single model and then create multiple data sets because we did the modeling first. But on the right-hand side, because the model is tied to the data set, we basically need to create different model per each data set. So it becomes a bit of a problematic situation to manage. And the actual situation in the many of those organizations is much more complex than that. For example, we would probably have multiple databases that we need to support. And having a single model means that we can just define how we're going to create those joins and cross-functional analysis across multiple data sources into one single model. And then everyone will be will take advantage of that. As opposed to that, on the right-hand side, basically everything becomes a manual siloed approach to manage the complex situation. And this also comes into a very interesting point of view when we think about the data governance. So let's think about the security. Where do you define security? And basically, security is defined as part of the model. And because you have the single model on the left-hand side and multiple models on the right-hand side, the security becomes the same situation. You will have one single security definition on the left-hand side approach, and you will have multiple security definitions on the right-hand side approach. So this is the big benefit of having the model-first approach. It's much easier to manage when it becomes a larger scale deployment. And that is what we call so-called semantic graph approach. What we want to do is to create a unique semantic layer and have a one consolidated layer of model and layer of security, layer of data governance. And without this semantic graph or with multiple metadata approach, we will basically end up having so many different definitions of the same things and so many different definitions of security, so many different data governance definitions and policies, so on and so forth. So when it comes to a much more scalable approach, that's where semantic graph becomes much more powerful than the typical data-first approach.
So I see. So now we have this holistic view of the data, and this is what you call the semantic graph. So can you explain a little bit more, what are the components and what are the different things that you create in this semantic layer, and how the user is going to define all these objects by himself up to the application?
Yes, so semantic graph basically links the data to the users. And so we're going to start with the data. And on top of the databases, data warehouses that we have, and what we're going to do is we're going to let MicroStrategy to understand how the data look like. And we're going to import the table definitions and column definitions and define which columns are facts and which columns are attributes, and how to link the attributes to create some hierarchical view. And on top of that, using those facts and attributes, we can actually further create those business components like calculations or prompt, filter criteria, custom groups. And using those components, we're going to create data sets, reports, dashboards, dossiers, and collection of those will be analytical application. And any application that was created will be deployed to multiple clients that we support in MicroStrategy. Very interesting thing about this is once we create the first layer, the model layer, we don't really need to think about how the data look like, how the tables are named, the columns are named, how to join those tables, because everything is solved at the model layer, which means we can actually leave the others to the business people. So business people can use the business language to create the calculations, filter criteria, KPIs, reports, dashboards, so on and so forth, without having to understand any single thing about how to join the table and all those IT language that's required to get the data out of the database.
Okay, I get it. So here, at the bottom layer, no data set yet. You just map and model everything, and then you let the user with a business language to create whatever they want without the need of IT, because they already did their job.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. So now let's imagine I am one of the users, and how easy it is to manipulate these objects to create my analysis. What will be the typical user flow from these users?
Mm-hmm. So basically, you want to understand how it looks like for the business analyst.
Yeah.
So,
how do they see all these objects when they start, opening the browser and manipulate MicroStrategy?
Yeah, I think this is a very important aspect because we basically want to empower people and we want to make full use of semantic graph. And let's basically take a look. As I said, any analytics will start by having the data. And typical approach is to query the data or import the data, import an Excel file. But with Semantic Graph, because all the objects are defined, I don't really need to understand the column name or anything, or I can just use my business language to go through the attributes, metrics, filters, so on and so forth, to basically go through the shopping approach of creating a data set. So I will just select the attributes, metrics, and filter and create add. And then MicroStrategy just wrote the SQL, run against the database, and gave the result set back to me. So once the data set is already in my dossier, I can simply start asking questions. This part is probably very similar to any visualization tools. I can simply drag and drop, create a variety of visualizations. In this case, I would like to understand the contribution of my top tier customers in terms of revenue. And so I basically created like 2 visualization and also a calculation that gives me the % contribution of the top tier customers against the overall revenue. I also understand that the more that we have the revenue, the more revenue we have from the top tier customers, we actually have better profit margin. So I would like to see how my team and my employees are performing along with that thought process. So I would just create a simple quadrant analysis to understand which team is having a better performance, which team requires a bit of coaching, and I can simply create this quadrant analysis. But here's a very interesting thing happened. Like typical process of visual analytics, like basically means that I'm going to continuously ask business questions and follow-up questions. And now I'm looking at the region level data for my top tier contribution versus profit margin. But I want to understand is whether there is any outlier at the employee level. But the problem is I don't have any employee in my data set. And the typical situation, if I wrote it or if I asked someone to write it, I would have to go back to that stage. I would have to rewrite the SQL or ask someone to rewrite the SQL, and I'll have to wait. But with MicroStrategy, because we use the semantic graph to create the data set to begin with, what we can do is simply do the same. Ask MicroStrategy that I need employee in my data set, and then just update it, and then MicroStrategy will rewrite the SQL and then give the result back. I can simply continue my visualization, continue my visual analytics without having to go back to anyone or any IT work. I will simply save this as a employee performance analysis for now. So what we just seen in the demo is basically the business users can own the entire cycle of analytics. So any self-service analytics or visual analytics starts with the business questions. And to solve the business question, we would basically go and get the data set to answer that and then do the visual analytics. And then maybe we will come up with a follow-up question, and we're going to have a closed loop cycle until we get some insight. And as I said, typical way of getting the data is to write something like write SQL myself or ask IT to write the SQL for me. But with the semantic graph, I, as a business user, without any understanding about how to write it, how to join it, I can simply select which fields, which filter I want to apply to a data set. I can simply get the data, and then I can simply modify the data so I can own the entire cycle by myself.
So I see. So now the IT has built the semantic layer, then the business users can take advantage of that and can save and create as many dashboards as they need without having to recreate all the rules and everything. How about a very important rule, because now you just showed one user creating one dashboard, but you can imagine like thousands of people doing the same, and they're going to share everything. So now are they going to have a different view? How does the semantic layer helps in terms of sharing the data across all the organization?
Yeah, sharing the content is very, very important, especially when it comes to self-service approach, because we want everyone to be the author of analytics content.
Yeah.
And at the same time, the collective intelligence is very important. So sharing is very important. Once I save the dashboard or dossier, I can simply just open that up in a view mode. And because I think this content is very important, very insightful, so I would like to share this content with my colleague who's running the San Francisco office. So I'll just share this dossier directly from MicroStrategy and share it, and then immediately a San Francisco office user will get the notification that MicroStrategy user has shared the dossier with you. So here you can see something very interesting, because this is something that I created without any help of IT. I didn't specify any security as well, but the SFO manager user is looking at something different than me. It's basically because the SFO manager has a different security profile than the user who created this dashboard. So without having to specify the security rule per data set or per dossier, everything is already defined at the semantic graph layer. So everything is automatic. So I, as a business user, I can just create and share without having to think about whether this is something shareable or not, because all the security will already be in place. And no matter what I do, I'm still going to be on top of the security model that's defined by my IT team and defined in the semantic graph. So that is how we define the security model. And you just saw the example of raw level security being applied without having to do anything from the business user side.
So I see what you meant with the raw level security, which is the number 3 on the screen now. So I guess that the user didn't have to do anything. So I guess that sometimes if he wants to share, then he needs to spend time to set up the security if he has to do it in a point solution. And now he doesn't have to do anything. What about the 2 others? Because you mentioned user privileges and object access control on your side. What are they related to? And isn't it the same as the level security that you just mentioned?
Yeah, so in semantic graph, we can basically specify 3 different aspects of security. The first one, the user privilege, is basically whether this person can use this feature or not. Because sometimes we don't want people to be able to download the data to their local hard drive. So something like that. The feature can be controlled. So which user can use which feature, that's the user privilege. And the second thing, the object access control, is a very interesting thing, because typically, yes, we do have access control at the report or dashboard or dossier level, but we also store everything in the object, including calculations, filters, attributes, and so on and so forth. So we can actually apply this as a column level security. For example, in a case that a set of users cannot see the private information such as email address or phone number or address of my client, we can simply use the object access control to make implement the column level security. An important thing is, again, all these 3 security components are defined at the semantic graph level. It's before the data. So no matter what the business users do, they will always sit on top of the security model that's defined in the semantic graph. That is a really powerful way. And without this, we cannot really give full freedom to the business users. But with this, because we have this, we can actually implement a true self-service on top of semantic graph.
So you mentioned that everything is objects, and that you tend to not duplicate the definitions. So let me give you an example. Like today, we are in 2021, and probably, the strategy of one organization might have changed. So probably it has an impact on the definitions of the different dashboard and analytics projects that are already developed. So how would such a change impact the semantic graph, and what is the effort to replicate all these new strategic KPIs into the dashboard, for example?
Yes, you're absolutely right. In fact, many of those common KPIs they change quite frequently. In fact, all the criteria changes, all the KPI definition changes, even security rule changes, and how that we physically store the data changes. And in this example, I just created one dossier you can see on the left side. And then the second one is after I share it with some other users. And maybe I will also have a enterprise dashboard that's created by my IT and certified by my IT. And in fact, if you look a little bit detail, the top tier customer revenue is being used in multiple different ways. We calculate contribution and display it here and there. And if we took the approach of data first approach, basically, if we change one thing, one dashboard, we can change one dashboard, but it does not mean that everyone will be looking at the same definition. People will be looking at the old definition, someone will be looking at the new definition. What's going to happen is they will gather in a room to discuss something about the data, and they ended up discussing whose data is correct. So the trust in the data breaks very easily when the definition changes. But in MicroStrategy with the semantic graph, if you remember, everything is object. We don't duplicate the definition anymore. And top tier customer revenue in this case is a separate object. And in fact, now it is defined as top 10% in terms of profit. So top 10% customer in terms of profit is defined as a top tier customer. What if I change it to 15%? I can simply go to the calculation, the metric editor, and change the definition. And that new definition will automatically change everything that's using that definition. So all three, maybe if there was more, maybe hundreds and thousands of dashboards and reports using the same top tier customer definition, it will all reflect the newest definition. So in Semantic Graph, we have different layers. So we start off by having the data abstraction and put the business components on top of it, and then build the application on top of that. And if we change one thing at the bottom end, basically that change will propagate to every single thing that we have in the Semantic Graph, in MicroStrategy environment. So as an IT, if I change one thing, I can basically change everything. I can change everything that I created. I can change everything that the business users created in self-service. I can basically change everything that's going to be created from now on using that same definition, which means that I can really keep the ownership of the business abstraction layer upward to the business side. So they can still have their full freedom. And I, as an IT, will have a full control on which version the people are looking at, that we can minimize the amount of time and effort that people will spend in discussing whose number is correct. We can actually let the people discuss what to do with the number with this approach. So this is how we keep the trust in the analytics with the fully self-served environment.
So everyone will use the same KPIs, same definition.
That's correct. That's correct.
If I have and if I see that there is a filter that will be used in many different places, I can actually create only one filter and use it in many different places.
That is correct.
Okay. So then I see now why we call that a semantic graph, because it looks like everything is connected, and you know, it can be up to down, or up to or down to up on everything. Can it be then useful to identify, you know, what is the definition of a KPI, and then do some kind of dependencies analysis to see what is my analytics about, what is my usage of my MicroStrategy platform?
Yes, that's absolutely correct. In fact, in MicroStrategy Semantic Graph, everything is like object linking to objects, which means that if we start off with one object, we can simply track who's looking at that object and where this object is looking at. So we can have both forward and backward lineage automatically, because it's basically objects. If you look at a report, we can easily track down which attributes and calculations, metrics are included in that, and where that data is coming from, and where that data is flowing into. So lineage is a very strong aspect of having semantic graph. All the object information is linked to each other, so it can easily be tracked. And one of the other benefits of having the object architecture is being able to have the real-time statistics and telemetry of the usage of those objects. So for example, we can understand things like which people are using which KPI, and which KPI is the most commonly used KPI, and which KPI is more related to another KPI, so on and so forth. And that is what we call telemetry information. So basically, we collect all the usage telemetry information back into Semantic Graph, and we can use that to further optimize the platform usage, further optimize the usage of the content itself. We can use that information to even create the audit trail to understand like who used which part of the data. So that's something we have in Semantic Graph. And we also have a component called Platform Analytics, which is not only just collection of the data, but also the analytics on top of the telemetry data that we have. So in Platform Analytics, we have a rich set of ready-to-use dossiers. People can immediately start using it to understand like the object telemetry and user activity, and like all of those system compliance information or the performance-related system telemetry information, so on and so forth. So it's very easy to manage and have the audit trail about the entire analytics platform.
I think it's great to extend the semantic graph beyond just the definitions and the different links between the objects and have all this telemetry. KW, I would like to stop and pause a little bit here because we have been talking about all these concepts and how the user can benefit from that. I just would like to know if you have a good example of a real-life application where the semantic graph has brought a significant improvement in how the users are going to access the data.
Absolutely. In fact, based on my experience, if we have like more like broader number of use cases or more like deeper the maturity into the analytics, at the maturity level goes up, the adoption level goes up, the importance of semantic graph and impact of semantic graph increases together. For example, I have a banking customer who has been using some self-service tool for years, and they ended up building more than 100 full-time employees supporting that usage, because they need to manually create the data set, support the data set for the business users, and they will have to manually manage the security and the data governance aspect for so many different applications. And it becomes exponentially expensive to manage that and support that additional use cases. By turning that approach into semantic graph approach, we were able to significantly reduce the effort and the cost of managing those. We have automated more than 100 full-time employee worth of manual effort with the semantic graph. And not only that, in the business user perspective, they can do more, because back in the days, whenever they want some data, they will have to rely on the IT and wait for the IT to come back to them. Maybe it takes a few days, but now they can basically do that in a few seconds themselves. So they can actually do a lot more. They are much more empowered. They can own the entire cycle of analytics. They can create the data set, create visualization, share with the others. So they can do everything themselves. The business users are much more empowered. And they didn't really stop there. Very interesting thing about that client is they took the adoption of semantic graph to another level. So they took, because they have the trusted data and the semantic graph built, they put very innovative applications, such as like building knowledge graph and then building natural language processing on top of semantic graph, and even build a smart bot on top of semantic graph so that the business users can have the conversational interface to analyze and have access to the data. So they're taking the adoption of semantic graph to a very much like innovation driver aspect in their organization.
So wait a moment, you say that they took advantage for self-service, but then you derived afterwards onto other applications with chatbot and something. So it's not only analytics, it's not only grid and visualizations, you can extract the information from the semantic graph.
Yes, in fact, having semantic graph basically means one thing. You have a trusted and manageable and certified data. And it's not only MicroStrategy who can benefit from that data. So what we do is we have the API layer that you can use to build any application using the data from any application. So we can build a web application, mobile application, any like workflow application, and all of those applications can take advantage of the trusted, certified, and manageable data that we have in MicroStrategy. So if you remember the reverse pyramid diagram that kind of shows the impact propagation, and if you think about the data governance aspect, basically all the data security, trustability and everything is defined at the bottom half of that diagram. That's managed by IT. And the idea is basically to open up the entire semantic graph to whatever it is, like including the analytics tools and some third-party development tools, and maybe like R, Python, Jupyter type of the data science tool. And if you think about the data science specifically, most of the data scientists spend like 85% of their time on getting the data and validating the data. And if they had access to trusted data, which is already clean, and they can actually focus their time on doing something more advanced, like doing some real like machine learning or building the algorithm, so on and so forth. So it can actually benefit significantly, like multiple different personas with semantic graph and the open architecture perspective.
Okay, I see. Thank you, KW. So I think you've been exposing like the greatness of the semantic graph through different aspects. It looks like it's very convincing. Isn't it like the blue pill and the red pill? I need to choose between model first and dataset first. So is it something that is clashing here? And so for the audience, how do they start? You see, it looks like a big thing to create. Do they need to do this big thing? How do they start to build this semantic graph?
That's a very good question, Laurent. At the beginning, as I said, both like data first and model first approaches have their own pros and cons. Of course, once you have the semantic graph, we can manage everything. We can have a very solid data governance, but it does take a bit of time to build a semantic graph to begin the analytics. So the quicker approach, the data first approach still matters. And there are cases that is probably a better approach. And in MicroStrategy, it's not semantic graph approach is not the only approach. In fact, we can actually take the data first approach. For example, I can import the data from Excel file, or maybe like write a SQL and import the data from a database. I can basically get the data into MicroStrategy without having to create a semantic graph. And of course, if it's especially when it's an Excel file, probably the data is not 100% clean. I can do a bit of data wrangling to clean it up, and maybe I can even link the data to the semantic graph component object, so that I will have I'm able to do some cross-functional analysis between the imported data and semantic graph data. So yes, in MicroStrategy, we can actually take the data first approach. And as you can see, now I imported an Excel file. I have two data sets in my dossier, and I can simply start my analysis using this data import data set.
So you mean that the data set that you imported is now linked? Like, see, the employee is linked to the one in the semantic graph, right? So all the
That's correct.
security will inherit and everything.
That's correct. So the moment that you link to the semantic graph attribute, all the stuff that you've defined in the semantic graph will apply to the data import as well. And of course, you can also use it as a join key to create the joint like analysis. So yeah, let's take a look. In this case, I just imported a revenue target from my Excel file. And then I can simply create a analysis having revenue and then maybe revenue target from like two different data sources. And I can create some calculation to say the revenue attainment, because that's probably what I want to understand. So with multiple data sets, I can create a cross-functional analysis without too much of an effort. I can simply do that, and I can further continue my analysis and probably finish building it without having to model anything. I can just import it and finish my visualization with this. But important thing is, probably in this case, the revenue target versus revenue is is kind of an analysis that I would like to keep, because I would like to keep tracking of this type of measurements throughout the entire year. So probably it's not a best idea to keep the data import model, the data first model, because it's not scalable. So I would probably ask my IT to work on importing the data into data warehouse, building the semantic graph for the revenue target as well. And the moment that we're done, what we can do is simply replace the data set, the imported data set, with the data that is in the semantic graph. So I can simply do that with a few clicks. And the moment that I replace the data set, as you can see in my Excel, in fact, I only had 3 regions in my Excel, but in my semantic graph, I have data for the entire 8 regions that I have. So you can simply continue with the data import approach. And then later on, once the semantic graph is ready, you can just simply switch over to the semantic graph and trusted data. That's what we call Bi-Modal BI. Simply, you can start with the data import. At the same time, we can start building the metadata and semantic graph and building the data set that's supported. And then we can create the visualizations. Maybe we can even join the visualizations and create a cross-functional analysis and share and publish that. And by the time that we are ready with the semantic graph, without losing anything, I don't have to recreate any visualizations in Dossier. I can simply replace the data set from the data import data set to the semantic graph data set. So in this way, we can start quick. We don't have to limit the business people to wait until we finish building up the semantic graph. We can give the full freedom to the business users. They can import it, they can start building their own stuff, and the content will never be lost, because the moment that we are done, well, the moment that IT is done with building semantic graph, we can just switch over the data without losing anything in the content perspective. So that's how we can keep the full freedom to the business.
So they can choose the best path that fits with their needs. They don't need to start everything first.
That's correct.
Hey, KW, I wanted to check, because we were discussing all this semantic graph, and we are in the world, and in the world session we discuss a lot also about hyperintelligence. You never talk about hyperintelligence within the semantic graph, so maybe it's obvious, but my question is, will the hyperintelligence cards be using the semantic graph with the security, with all the different KPIs and all the filters that are inherited and everything?
Absolutely. In fact, let's take a step back and think about semantic graph. And basically what it does is linking those so many different use cases, so many different personas and technologies with the data. And like, to link the data, what we do is we need to solve the data governance problem, the system governance problem, and all of those. And semantic graph is exactly doing that. It's the middle layer that sits between the application and the data. And hyperintelligence is one of the applications that we have in MicroStrategy. So it does sit on top of enterprise semantic graph, which means all the security, all the telemetry, all the aspect that we've just discussed about. Hyperintelligence sits on top of that. So if we define a security, yes, hyperintelligence will also be on top of that same security model.
Okay, so the loop is closed, I think. Thank you, KW, for your insight around the semantic graph. I have a last question for you, KW, because you've been in the market and in the industry since so many years. I remember that many years ago, the semantic layer, and I talk about the layer, was very important. It was something that the customers and the prospects were really looking for. But then it has changed a little bit the last years with a focus on the self-service and the visualizations. How would you rate the importance of the semantic graph today among your customers, among the market? What do you think the market is thinking about this semantic graph?
I think the importance of semantic layer was never diminished. I think it has been very important. It is still very important. The thing is, the question that I always think about is who was the people who were able to use semantic layer? And it was mostly IT, because the authoring of reports and dashboards was pretty much done by IT at the time. But now what we're trying to do is to empower the business users to do it themselves. And which means that now the important thing is there any way to make them leverage the power of semantic graph or semantic layer? And now in today's session, basically what we've discussed is how we can help the business people to use semantic graph to maximize their self-service analytics. So I think the more we want to empower the people, and the more we want to encourage the people to create their own content, to share the content, and to make the decisions based on the data, I think the importance of semantic graph is extremely important. And basically, yeah, the more that the customers get, the more mature, the importance of semantic graph is increasing at the same time.
Thank you, KW, for your expertise and insight. Do you remember the last time we shook hands?
Yeah, I think it was last year.
It was in Orlando for the last MicroStrategy World. So I hope to see you soon and shake your hands. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a great day ahead.
Thank you so much, Laurent. Have a great day.